Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello, hello. Welcome to another amazing, empowering episode of Trauma Talk Tuesday. I'm Juanita Gaynor, and I'm your guide through this candid conversations we're going to have about healing and growth. You know, if you're new here, consider subscribing, joining our community. Each Tuesday, we deep dive into stories of resilience and triumph and the journey towards healing from trauma. I know definitely these conversations can be tough, but they're crucial. And together we can create a safe space to share, to learn, and to support. Now before we jump into today's discussion, make sure you hit that bell icon so you never miss an episode. And if you find value in these talks, give us a thumbs up. It really helps our community grow. And so, welcome, welcome. And today we're going to talk about breaking the cycle, transforming generational trauma. That's a nutshell. That is a lot in a nutshell. Transforming generational trauma. When I think about just generationally the trauma that I went through, my mother went through possibly, and then her mother went through, I can see how some things kind of ended up on my back. I can see how we can always may potentially end up in a tizzy that we don't necessarily think about. And you may think, why is that so? And it can be a little difficult because you want to keep traditions, but you don't want to keep traditions. And sometimes the trauma is even in those traditions. And so, what we're going to do today is we're really going to just navigate, really easily navigate through that information. And so, hopefully, everyone has been having an amazing week. But let's explore how we're going to break free from generational trauma. We're going to discuss how to foster healing. And again, if you're new here, subscribe. Hit that bell icon because I don't want you to miss this community, this conversation that we're having each week. So let's deep dive into generational trauma. Basically, refers to the transition from trauma from one generation to the next. And trauma, like I described last week, it can be emotional, psychological, even physical, and it has a lasting impact on the family dynamics. Now, the good thing is it's a chain that is not unbreakable. It's very breakable, but we're gonna really go deep dive into the origins of the generational trauma, its impact, and most importantly, how to transform it. Now, when we say, what do you mean like it has lasting impacts on the family dynamic? Well, generational trauma actually hinders how you operate overall. Um, so if I'm just going to say, I'm going to always use myself as a personal example. My mother was a heroin addict, and so she used it to cope. She was closed in her emotions. She was never really, open when it came to that, especially when she was high. Now, when she was sober, it was a different thing. We had some glimpses or whatever. But because of the trauma, whatever trauma she experienced as a child that led her to doing the drugs and the alcohol, it affected how we were parented. It affected how we was treated. In turn, her trauma transferred to us because I was like very confrontational. I was, non-communicative. I didn't want to be bothered, don't want to be around people, don't want to, deal with things at that moment. Things can fester. It takes a lot to, get to me. And Therefore, it affected relationships, personal and professional. You know, I always used to tell people, especially those who have issues with other women, and I'm not talking about the issues that are justified and that you happen whatever time, but I mean just an innate issue. I say to them, deep dive and think about the first woman that broke your heart, and the same thing in the men, and the same thing with men. I tell my people, look at the first woman that broke your heart or the first man that broke your heart, and that will stem your relationship issues when it comes to you know relationships with the same or the opposite sex. And so that transformation, you know led to me not thinking, having high self-esteem of myself, allowing myself to be beat down, also being in domestic violence situations. And it wasn't until I got to the crux, the core of the issue. Now, of course, later I found out that my mother was also a victim of sexual violation as a child. So, because she never got help for that, you got to think they didn't talk about that back then. You didn't put people on blast. You shut up, you kept quiet, or you got moved to, another part of the family or whatever. So, drugs and alcohol was her way to cope as a teenager and an adult for being violated. So, therefore, because she never was able to heal and deal with her trauma, not only did it get passed on, but it was amplified. And I decided that I wanted to break that trauma, that wasn't going to go over through another generation, that it was going to stop with me. And that is where we have to get into dealing with, generational trauma. You know, See, to truly break the cycle, it's essential to understand where it comes from. When you think about generational trauma, it often originates from a significant historical event, family tragedies, systemic issues. For instance, it could be the effects of war, discrimination, and abuse that can linger for generations. But see, recognizing the root of it is the first step, like I always said. So, generational trauma manifests in like different ways and affects different individuals and entire families. And it has the patterns of unhealthy coping mechanisms, emotionally distancing yourself, even dysfunctional relationships. I admit those were all my testimonies at some point. They were all, I promise you. But going through counseling helped me understand how it shaped my behavior. And so once I understood that and understood the core, I was able to break free from the grips. Now, don't get me wrong, I still got some work to do. There's still some things that are probably deep down in, and I just haven't gotten to the point in my healing journey that I can deal with it, because there's still some stuff there. But compared to even 2 years ago, that transformation has been amazing. And so many of you may be looking like, well, I've gone through counseling and I'm still not fully healed. I need you to take this with all love. It's a marathon. This is not, I repeat, this is not a sprint. Because what's going to happen during the healing process, and I'm a testament to that because everyone's different, but the core things that's going to happen during the healing process is that you're going to heal from one aspect, and then you're going to start reflecting, and then you're going to realize the situation that you was in or around was utterly and completely toxic, and then it opens up a new realm of healing, because now you really get to feel what that toxicity was like. You really get to acknowledge that it was crazy. You really get to stand in what it felt like to be disrespected, misused, abused, cast aside, not thought of. You really get to sit in that and you can reflect and you're like, but I don't have to stay there. Now, it will still hurt, but it's not going to hurt to the point where you now can't function. You're now able to look at those past transgressions and grow from it even more, and also put a hedge of protection around it and be like, okay, this may be what triggers me, and I haven't fully recovered from that, but I know it triggers me, but I have things to help me cope, things to help me manage, things to help me move on so that I can be a better person, you know. So when it talks about dealing with generational trauma, see, we want to break the cycle. And there's about 4 steps I really want to go into about breaking that cycle on this evening. And so there's 4 of them. And it's self-awareness, open communication, seeking professional help, and education and empowerment. And I'm going to say this disclaimer before I really get into the meat of this. I'm going to always emphasize on seeking professional help because it's necessary, because you need it. Professional help is going to put things in perspective. It's going to help you identify that you wasn't crazy on some things, because trust me, I thought I was crazy on a lot of things. So you definitely want professional help. So let's deep dive into these steps, like really kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it all. Self-awareness. I put this first because when you become aware, when you acknowledge the presence of generational trauma in your family, you can then face it head on. Look at, you may say, well, how do I know it's connected to, generational trauma? I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to write down 3 experiences that you may have had in your life. I say take one from your early years, your teenage years, your early 20s, early 30s. Let's do 4. Do that. And I want you to think back on stories your mom told you, or your grandma told you, or your auntie told you, and see how your experience potentially fits into another relative's experience, and how was it dealt with. You're going to be amazed at how these, experiences are connected. You know, you may have been beaten as a child because your mother was beaten as a child and her mother was beaten as a child, and or they would talk too crazy because this is what your grandmother or your grandfather did to their children. You and I'm gonna say, and of course we're coming into Black History Month, and so I'm gonna even say discrimination. We're not so far removed from it, but when you think about just our grandmothers and our great grandmothers, them coming up in an era, in a time where they had no autonomy and that they didn't, couldn't make decisions for their own selves, that then leads to how they raise their children. And that leads to how their children raises their children. So every experience, even though it's not violent, you got the non-violent ones too, it transforms how you function. For another example, it could be the death of your grandmother. Your grandmother could have been the center of everyone's world. She held it together. She was the one to you could really talk to her. But she dies unexpectedly. and now the world that you knew it as doesn't exist anymore. Now what do? That trauma, that sudden loss is a trauma, and it can trickle down how you live the rest of your life. So look at your experiences in your life and see how that could have been formed or predicated from trauma, that was potentially passed down to you, and once you've done that and you look through things and you said, okay, I identify some patterns here, you want to have open communication. You know, if they don't create the safe space, you create the safe space for open and honest communication within your family. You know, Mary may not be able to talk when Sue's around. So instead of having Sue with you all the time, maybe you and Mary go someplace else and have a great conversation. You know, encourage your family to share their experiences. I would say this: I miss talking to my grandmother because I would just sit there and just listen to the stories. That's how I learned a lot. I learned that she had a good life, but it was a tough life. I realized, not realized, but I knew that her husband loved her and wanted the best for her. And when time came, she never worked again. But how after he died, life became a little bit harder. But she still didn't have to work. Money was taken care of. So she was able to worry about other things. So being the, sounding board and the open for reason for family to really have that conversation, and opening the conversation, you're going to end up to a point, you're going to come to a wall. And this is when you're going to need a therapist, seeking professional help. Because your therapists and your counselors provide valuable insights and coping mechanisms, you know, and that's where also group and family therapy come into play because you have somebody who is a neutral, mitigator who can really nicely piece together everyone's experiences and communicate it in a way that everyone understands and respects it. So having a professional at hand is key to help you foster healing when it comes to generational, trauma. And education and empowerment. Learn about history and the roots of your generational trauma. That means going through your family tree, understanding who so and so was, empower yourself, your family through education so that it isn't going to continue on. You have to know who your family was, what there was about the history of that family, and the potential trauma that was attached to it so that you can actually move on, from it successfully, you know. And so when you think about, you know, breaking the cycles of generational trauma, I can honestly say I've spoken to many people who are in that process, who have decided that they're going to be the object of change. And, their stories are going to be so amazing. I was able to break that. I decided that, we were going to be more than what people put on us. We wasn't going to be subjugated by our emotions. We wasn't going to be, traumatized by them either. We were going to effectively move forward and be the best that we could absolutely be. And so when we think about breaking the cycle, it's not just about healing the present, but it's also building the resilience for the future. And so here's some ways to definitely have and cultivate a healthier legacy. One I think is the most important, and I think this is a portion that comes down to no one discuss, and it's cultivating emotional intelligence. People don't think or believe that emotional intelligence plays a role in healing, but it absolutely does. You know, because if you teach it to the younger generation, They learn how to identify things quickly, succinctly, and they get right to the bottom of that. And with that, we have to promote healthy coping mechanisms. Art, sports, mindfulness to manage stress away, not the 40, not the, clubbing, not the, pow pow bang bang, none of that. We need healthier ways, not the sitting there eating a bucket of chicken and some popcorn or some, cookies. None of that. We need healthy ways to manage because we not only need to be mentally, spiritually, and emotionally healthy, we need to be physically healthy. So being and finding healthy coping mechanisms will allow you to heal with peace and love, and you can move forward. And finally, foster supportive relationships. This is the biggest thing that I can actually say. You have to stay connected. You have to understand who your family is. Now, get some you can't be around. You can't. You just can't. But for those who you can, you want to go ahead and foster that relationship and for it to be supportive and set in those proper boundaries. Because when you do so, it's an amazing thing. You can, have the best thing in the absolute world. You know, breaking the cycle of generational trauma is a journey that requires, of course, your self-reflection, your openness, your commitment to positive change, and understanding its origins and addressing its impact and implementing proactive strategies. You can transform that narrative for yourself and for future generations. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be whole. And we want you to be all that and then some. We don't want you just dangling around. So think about really hitting them head on and definitely moving past those things. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Trauma Talk Tuesday. If you resonated with today's discussion, give us a thumbs up. Share with someone who might benefit and subscribe for more content on personal growth and well-being. And remember, breaking the cycle is not just a personal victory, but a legacy of resilience for the generations to come. Now, like I said, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel for more insightful conversations on healing and growth, click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. Thank you for being a part of Trauma Talk Tuesday, family. Thank you for being a part of the family. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. Now, until next Tuesday, take care of yourself and each other. And always be kind in your word, in your thoughts, and in your deed. I'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great one.